From CEO to cleaner, the undercover move that shook the company. Before we continue, please ensure to like, share and subscribe. Vanessa Richardson, the CEO of a thriving company, had always prided herself on leading with integrity and fairness. But as she sat at her desk, scrolling through report after report, frustration bubbled inside her. The complaints were mounting, and they all pointed to one thing: her management team had lost touch with the values the company was built on. She could feel the weight of the growing discontent in her staff. The lack of respect for the lower-ranking employees, the arrogance seeping into every corner of the workplace, and the diminishing morale were becoming impossible to ignore. Her fingers hovered over the tablet, the glowing screen a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality reflected in the reports. She had built this company from the ground up, but now, it felt as if everything she worked for was slipping away. Was this how it was going to end? Her mind raced, and the room seemed to close in around her as the walls of her corporate office became a prison of her own creation. Vanessa knew something had to change. But what? Should she address it directly with her management team? Fire the culprits? Something felt off about simply reacting to the problem with more authority. There had to be a better way to uncover the truth. To see the reality of what was happening when she wasn't watching. That's when the idea struck her. She stood up abruptly, a sense of resolve replacing her frustration. The decision was made. She walked to her assistant's desk and gave instructions to clear her calendar for the next few days. The voice of her assistant faded as she nodded absently, her mind already focusing on the mission ahead. Vanessa's eyes sharpened as she turned on her heel, leaving the office behind. This was going to be no ordinary solution. She would go undercover. Observe her employees without their knowledge and get to the heart of the issue. She knew it would be risky, but the stakes were high. She wasn't just going to reprimand people from a high office chair. She needed to understand the real culture within her company. To feel what her employees felt. With a purposeful stride, she headed toward the elevator. As the doors closed behind her, a moment of doubt flickered. What would she find? Would this undercover mission reveal the thing she feared most? Or would it give her hope? There was no turning back now. She was about to step into the shoes of someone entirely different, someone invisible. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, the sound of voices and the hum of office equipment filled the air, but Vanessa barely noticed. She was already deep in thought, mapping out her next steps. She had been at the top of the corporate ladder for so long, but she couldn't help but wonder how the people who worked under her saw her. Was she just a face behind a glass office? A distant figure who demanded results without understanding the day-to-day struggles of her employees? As she made her way to the car, her phone buzzed with another email notification, but she ignored it. The answers she needed were not in her inbox. They were out there in the real world, among the people who had been silently suffering under the weight of a toxic work culture. From CEO to cleaner, the undercover move that shook the company. Vanessa wasn't afraid of what she might uncover, but she knew it would change everything. This mission would either expose a company in decline or inspire a revolution from within. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as the city skyline faded into the distance. The car turned onto a quiet street, and Vanessa's mind raced through possible disguises. How could she blend in? How could she go unnoticed while observing the very people she had trusted to run her company? The answer wasn't clear, but she was determined to find it. As she walked into a small, dimly lit store to buy her new uniform, she couldn't help but wonder, would her employees recognize her for who she truly was? Would they see the CEO behind the cleaner's disguise? Or would they think she was just another anonymous face, someone they could treat however they liked? Vanessa stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her new uniform. She looked nothing like the CEO who commanded attention in boardrooms and conference calls. Her reflection seemed almost foreign to her. But there was no turning back now. This was the role she would play, and she had to embrace it. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she checked it. An email from her assistant. The meeting with the board members is still scheduled for next week. Are you sure you want to proceed with the changes you mentioned? She let out a slow breath, tapping the screen as she typed her reply, yes. We need to shake things up. Vanessa tucked her phone into her pocket and walked out of the store, her mind sharper than ever. As she approached her car, she couldn't help but think back to the reports. The arrogance. The disrespect. The employees who felt invisible and unappreciated. She had to do something about it. She was going to see things from the ground up, literally. As she drove toward the office, she felt a surge of anticipation mixed with a touch of fear. Would she be able to make a real difference? Would she be able to change the company for the better, or would the toxicity be too deep to fix? The answer, she knew, would lie in the days to come. Vanessa stood in front of her full-length mirror, staring at the worn-out uniform in her hands. It felt strange, almost surreal, as the fabric slipped through her fingers. This wasn't who she was, at least, not anymore. Once, she had been the image of success and power, commanding boardrooms and shaping the future of her company. Now, she was about to become someone entirely different. She was about to slip into the shadows. The uniform was nothing like the tailored suits she usually wore. It was faded, a dull shade of gray with the company logo faded almost to the point of being unrecognizable. It was the uniform of someone who blended in, who was overlooked, and who went unnoticed, exactly what Vanessa needed to become. She thought about her team, her management, and how they treated the very people who made the company run. She wasn't here to punish anyone, not yet, at least. This mission was about understanding, about seeing the company from a perspective no one else had. Vanessa took a deep breath, slipping into the uniform. The fabric clung to her differently than the power suits she was used to. This was not a role she had ever played before. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. This was her moment of transformation, her chance to see the truth, not from her elevated CEO perch but from the ground level. She stood tall in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of someone she barely recognized. The woman staring back at her was humble, anonymous, and unimportant. The woman who had run a multi-million-dollar company now looked like just another employee, invisible to the world around her. She adjusted the frayed collar of the uniform, still unsure of what she would find when she stepped into the building the next day. But one thing was certain, she had no choice but to go through with it. As she fixed her hair, pulling it back into a simple ponytail, the weight of the task ahead hit her. Was this really the right decision? Would this undercover journey bring the change she so desperately wanted to see, or would it expose something far darker than she could have imagined? The seconds felt like hours as she stood frozen, gazing into the mirror. A soft hum echoed from the refrigerator in the corner of the room, pulling her back to the present. She turned away from the mirror and looked around the apartment. Her luxurious life, the comfortable surroundings she had worked so hard to build, seemed distant now. The sleek furniture, the polished floors, it all felt foreign, detached from the reality of the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make her success possible. Vanessa knew that her life would never be the same after this. There would be no going back. She had chosen to give up her comfort, her status, and the power that came with it, all to uncover the truth. The phone buzzed on her desk. She glanced at it briefly, seeing the name of her assistant flashing on the screen. She didn't pick up. There was no turning back now. Instead, she grabbed her keys and walked toward the door. Her reflection in the glass pane of the door caught her eye for a split second. There she was, standing on the precipice of something much bigger than herself, something that could change everything. The drive to the office felt long, though it was only a few minutes away. Every stoplight, every turn, felt like a test. Would she really be able to see her company for what it truly was? Could she endure the realization that her vision for her business had been so skewed by the people she trusted the most? As the car pulled into the parking lot, Vanessa paused for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She wasn't sure what to expect when she stepped out of the car. The lights of the building seemed distant now, almost cold in their glow. The facade of success that had once felt so solid was now a hollow shell. She wasn't the woman who sat at the top anymore. She was just another worker, another cog in the machine. The sound of the car doors closing felt too loud in the quiet of the night. Vanessa glanced up at the building once more before heading toward the entrance. The building, tall and imposing in the darkness, loomed over her like a giant, but she was no longer afraid. She had made it this far. Now, it was time to see the truth. Inside, the hum of office equipment greeted her as she walked through the back entrance, hoping to slip in unnoticed. No one paid her any attention. That was the point. She was just another face among many. As she moved through the halls, the reality of her decision began to settle in. The building, so familiar when seen from above, seemed different from the ground level. There was an urgency in the air, a tension that lingered in the hallways, though no one noticed her presence. She made her way to the staff area, slipping into the cleaner's closet to prepare for the day. She pulled on her gloves and grabbed the cleaning supplies she would need. The camera followed her every movement, capturing her as she adjusted her uniform one final time. She wasn't just here to clean the floors or wipe the windows. She was here to clean the company, to wipe away the layers of arrogance and disregard that had grown unchecked for too long. As Vanessa set her equipment down, the door opened suddenly. She froze, unsure of who would walk in. Was it someone who recognized her? Would this be the moment her cover was blown? The footsteps grew louder, and she braced herself. The door creaked open, revealing a figure from the past, someone she hadn't expected to see tonight. Vanessa entered the company headquarters early in the morning, the cold tile of the lobby beneath her feet clicking softly with each step. The buzz of the office was already alive with activity, but no one gave her a second glance. She was just another cleaner, invisible and overlooked. It was almost unsettling how easily she blended in, how no one recognized the woman they had all admired from the boardroom. It felt like stepping into a world she had once ruled, but now stood apart from. The morning light filtered through the glass walls, casting long shadows across the gleaming floors. Managers moved briskly past her, engaged in their own world of high-level discussions. Vanessa recognized a few of them, the familiar faces of the executives she once worked closely with. But they didn't see her. Not today. Today, she was nothing more than a nameless face, scrubbing the floors and cleaning up after their mess. She watched as a group of senior staff members walked by, their voices too loud in the quiet morning. They were discussing their latest perks, the extra vacations, the exclusive office privileges, and how they deserved even more. Their laughter was hollow, dripping with entitlement, and it made Vanessa's stomach turn. She had always suspected that this kind of arrogance ran deep, but hearing it firsthand was another matter entirely. It was a painful reminder of why she had taken this step. The disconnect between the management and the employees who actually made the company run was glaringly obvious. One manager, in particular, caught her attention. Michael, a senior executive who had always been quick to dismiss the concerns of the staff, was boasting about how he had convinced HR to extend his personal leave while taking no real responsibility for the gaps left in his department. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. How many times had she seen him shrug off accountability, always finding a way to pass the blame onto others? As she pushed her mop across the floor, the sting of his words lingered in her mind. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She had known the company had problems, but this? This was worse than she could have imagined. The arrogance of the management team, the complete lack of respect for the very people who made everything possible, it was infuriating. Vanessa had always prided herself on being a leader who understood the value of her people. But this? This was a broken system, one that needed more than just a small tweak. It needed a complete overhaul. Vanessa continued her work, wiping down the counters, mopping the floors. Every time she passed a manager or executive, she couldn't help but watch their interactions. Some were dismissive, too caught up in their own egos to acknowledge the employees who were serving them. Others seemed oblivious to the growing frustration among the support staff. The tension was palpable, but no one dared to speak up. Not in front of the higher-ups. Vanessa's heart pounded as she moved through the halls, quietly observing, listening to the conversations that no one expected her to hear. She wasn't just cleaning the floors, she was uncovering the cracks in the company's foundation. She could see how the lack of respect from the top had trickled down, how it had poisoned the workplace environment. And it made her sick. At one point, she overheard a conversation between two junior employees near the break room. They were talking about their frustration with management, how no one seemed to care about their well-being or even their basic concerns. The employees had been asking for better equipment for months, but all they ever got were promises. Vanessa's heart ached for them. She knew that their voices weren't heard, and in the midst of the larger corporate machine, they were completely powerless. The scene was growing more frustrating by the minute. Vanessa had come here hoping to get a glimpse of the truth, to see things from the ground level. What she hadn't anticipated was the depth of the disconnection. The gulf between the higher-ups and the lower-level employees was wider than she had ever imagined. But then, something shifted. As she moved toward the conference room, she noticed a few employees gathering around the water cooler, laughing. There was something genuine in their laughter, something human. The camera focused on their faces, capturing their camaraderie, their connection. It was a reminder of why she had taken this mission in the first place. Vanessa had come to uncover the problems, yes. But she also came to find hope, to see if there was something worth saving. And for the first time since she put on this disguise, she could see it. The employees who still cared, who still showed up every day despite the toxic environment, the ones who worked hard even when they were invisible. They were the heartbeat of the company. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of high heels clicking sharply behind her. Vanessa stiffened. She knew that sound well. It was Claire, one of the senior managers who had always been quick to criticize everyone around her. She turned her head, watching as Claire strutted past her with a cold glance. "You missed a spot," Claire said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Don't you know how to do your job properly?" Vanessa's pulse quickened. This was it. This was why she was here. To see this attitude, to hear it firsthand. But instead of responding, Vanessa simply nodded and smiled, just another cleaner, just another anonymous face. Claire, oblivious, walked away, completely unaware of who was standing right in front of her. The contrast between her arrogance and Vanessa's quiet resolve could not have been more stark. The smile that tugged at Vanessa's lips wasn't one of approval. It was a reminder. A reminder that the work she had to do was far from over. This was just the beginning. As Vanessa continued her rounds, her thoughts raced. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a witness, witnessing the cracks in the system that could no longer be ignored. She had the power to make things right, but the road ahead was uncertain. What would she uncover next? And would she be able to do anything about it before it was too late? The tension in the air thickened, and Vanessa knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Vanessa moved through the break room quietly, her steps muffled by the hum of low conversation and clinking coffee cups. The room was alive with the usual midday chatter, but today, it was different. Today, Vanessa was no longer the CEO, no longer the powerful figure who could command respect with a word or a glance. Now, she was just another cleaner, invisible, unnoticed. As she walked past the tables, the voices of her management team reached her ears, and she froze. They were talking about their employees, but not in the way she expected. They weren't discussing ways to motivate or encourage them. Instead, they were making disparaging comments about the very people who made their success possible. "I don't know why we keep these people around," one of them, Claire, sneered. "They're just here to fill in the gaps. We're the ones who make this place run, not them." Vanessa's heart sank. Claire had always been difficult to work with, but to hear her speak like this? It was a slap in the face. Her colleagues, the ones she had trusted to help run the company, were openly talking about their employees as if they were nothing more than disposable tools. Another voice joined in, Michael, the senior manager who had long been known for his arrogance. "Exactly. They're just here to do the grunt work." We don't need to listen to their complaints. It's not like they can do what we do. Vanessa's grip tightened around the cleaning supplies in her hand, but she didn't dare show any emotion. If they knew who she was, everything would be ruined. The last thing she wanted was for her cover to be blown. But the longer she listened, the harder it became to stay silent. She could feel her anger rising, but she knew this was a crucial moment. This was why she was here. To expose the truth, to show just how toxic the leadership had become. Yet, as she continued to clean the table nearby, her mind raced with frustration. How had it come to this? How had she allowed these people to gain so much power without realizing what kind of leaders they were becoming? The conversation shifted. Now, they were discussing the complaints from the support staff, valid concerns about understaffing, unsafe working conditions, and the need for better tools. The response was a laugh. "Oh, please," Claire scoffed. "Let them complain all they want. If they're unhappy, they can leave. We don't have time for their petty issues." Vanessa's jaw tightened as she fought the urge to confront them right then and there. How could they be so callous? These were the people who ensured that the offices ran smoothly, who cleaned, served, and fixed the things that kept the business functioning. Without them, the company would fall apart. And yet, here they were, mocking them, belittling them. As her cleaning rag passed over the table, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast in their demeanor compared to the rest of the staff. Her employees, those they were dehumanizing in this conversation, were the heart of the company. Yet these leaders saw them as nothing more than disposable workers, beneath them. The camera zoomed in on Vanessa's face as she silently processed everything. Her eyes narrowed with disbelief, and her breath caught in her throat. This was worse than she had imagined. The management was blind to the very foundation of the company. They didn't understand that their arrogance would eventually catch up with them. And worse, they were completely oblivious to the damage they were doing. The camera then cut to a close-up of her hand, clenched tightly around the cleaning rag, knuckles white. She controlled her emotions, knowing that now was not the time to react. But inside, she was seething. This was her company. It had been her vision, her work, and now it was being driven into the ground by the very people who were supposed to help her lead it. How could they forget the values she had built the company on? Respect, teamwork, hard work. These were the principles that had once set them apart. Now, it seemed, they were nothing more than words to these executives, hollow and meaningless. Vanessa silently moved to the next table, all the while keeping her emotions in check. This wasn't just about confronting them. It was about showing them how far they had fallen and how they needed to be reminded of the very foundation they had once embraced. A voiceover began, reflecting on the weight of leadership. Power can sometimes blind leaders to the reality of their actions. It's easy to forget the people who make your success possible when you sit at the top, surrounded by praise and privilege. But those who lead must never forget the cost of their decisions. The toll they take on those beneath them. The scene lingered on Vanessa as she finished cleaning the table, her mind churning with plans and ideas. She had come here to expose the flaws, yes, but now she saw the deeper issue. These leaders needed to be reminded of their responsibilities, of the very essence of leadership. They needed a wake-up call, and she was going to give it to them. But how? The questions weighed heavily on her. She had to make sure her next move counted. The wrong move could blow her cover, and that would be disastrous. As she moved toward the next part of her day, she knew that the real work had just begun. But the stakes had never been higher. If she failed, it wouldn't just be her mission that was compromised. The future of the company could be at risk. Vanessa stopped in her tracks, a thought striking her like a bolt of lightning. What if the people she needed to help the most, her employees, had already given up? What if the damage was so deep that no one could fix it? And as the camera followed her across the room, one question lingered: could she really make a difference before it was too late? The afternoon sun filtered through the office windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Vanessa, in her inconspicuous cleaning uniform, moved silently through the hallways, her mind still racing with the events of the day. It had been a tense, revealing morning, but now, as she cleaned near the break room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to something bigger, something she had to act on before it was too late. As she wiped down the counter near the break room door, she caught snippets of a conversation between two staff members. One of them, a young woman named Ella, stood with her arms crossed, her face flushed with frustration. Her colleague, a man named John, tried to comfort her, but Ella's distress was palpable. Her voice cracked as she spoke, "I don't know what to do anymore. He just humiliated me in front of everyone, and for what? I did my job. I didn't deserve that." Vanessa's heart sank as she recognized the manager Ella was referring to, a man named Richard, notorious for his harsh treatment of employees. Richard's face flashed in her mind, the smug expression he wore as he barked orders without regard for the people beneath him. Vanessa had witnessed his attitude toward the staff before, but hearing Ella's pain firsthand hit her harder than she expected. Without hesitation, Vanessa stepped forward, her voice gentle yet firm. "Ella, you're doing great. Don't let one person make you feel small. You are valuable here." Ella looked up, surprised to find someone, anyone, offering support. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her shoulders relaxing a bit. I just don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." Vanessa gave her a reassuring smile, though it felt hollow. She knew exactly what Ella meant. The culture at the company had deteriorated so deeply that even the most hardworking employees were losing faith. As Vanessa watched the brief exchange, her eyes tracked Richard, who emerged from the break room moments later. He didn't glance at Ella. In fact, he didn't even acknowledge her presence. Instead, he walked past with a look of indifference, his shoulders square and his expression set in stone. It was as if Ella's pain didn't even register on his radar. Vanessa felt a pang of anger stir within her, but she quickly masked it, not wanting to draw attention. This was worse than she thought. It wasn't just one manager or one incident, it was a systemic issue. The toxic behavior had been normalized, and the employees who were most vulnerable were the ones left to suffer. The weight of her realization hit her hard. She had come into this mission hoping to address the issues with a subtle approach, to expose the cracks in the system without creating chaos. But now, she understood that the only way to make real change was to confront it head-on. The problem wasn't just a few individuals. It was a culture, one that would require a complete overhaul to fix. As the afternoon wore on, Vanessa kept her eyes open, observing the managers who passed her by without a second glance. They walked with the air of people who had already won, who felt untouchable. Each one seemed more arrogant than the last, their expressions self-satisfied as they walked out of the building at the end of the day. Vanessa couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust. These were the people she had trusted to carry her vision forward, to help lead the company to even greater success. But now, it was clear to her, they were not leaders. They were self-serving individuals who had forgotten the very values that had once made this company great. They had become the very thing she had been trying to prevent. She finished her cleaning duties and took one final sweep through the building, walking through the empty hallways as the last of the managers filed out. The building, once a symbol of success, now felt cold and hollow. Vanessa paused at the front doors, watching the managers leave, each one looking like they'd just won a personal victory. She knew now that it was time for her to make her move. The moment she'd been preparing for had arrived. Her gaze hardened as she looked out at the sunset, the orange glow casting long shadows across the parking lot. The weight of the day's revelations pressed down on her, but her resolve only grew stronger. She had seen enough. The company she had built, the values she had instilled, had been reduced to something unrecognizable. She couldn't let it continue. But how could she expose it all without revealing her true identity? How could she get the others to see what was happening before it was too late? Vanessa knew she couldn't do it alone. She had to act fast. But what was the next step? The camera lingered on her face, the lines of concern replaced by a quiet determination. She had the knowledge now, the pieces of the puzzle. All that was left was to put it together. The question remained, could she make the change she so desperately wanted to see, or had the damage already been done? And as the camera faded to black, one thought hung in the air, could the company survive the truth? The next day, the air in the conference room was thick with tension. Vanessa, still in her cleaner uniform, stood just outside the door, her palms slightly clammy as she gripped the edges of the doorframe. The sound of the management team's casual chatter seeped out from the room, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. They were laughing, exchanging notes about their latest accomplishments, oblivious to the reality that Vanessa was about to expose. Her heart raced as she listened to their voices, each one more arrogant than the last. The sound of their laughter made her blood boil. She had been watching them from the shadows for days, observing their behavior and seeing the culture they had created. What they saw as harmless banter, what they thought was their right as leaders, was poisoning the very heart of the company she had built. Vanessa inhaled deeply, the weight of what she was about to do pressing heavily on her chest. She had the truth. The real story. The one they hadn't seen because they had been too busy basking in their own self-importance. Today, she was going to change all that. Stepping into the room, she closed the door softly behind her. The executives paused, their eyes flickering over her for a moment before dismissing her as just another invisible member of the support staff. She could feel their gaze, though, eyes that looked through her, not at her. She walked to the front of the room, her footsteps measured, echoing in the silence that had begun to settle. Slowly, she removed her hat and glasses, her movements deliberate, as the gasps of surprise spread like wildfire across the room. The executives froze, staring at her with wide eyes. There, standing before them, was the woman they had all known, Vanessa Richardson, the CEO of the company. The same CEO they had dismissed, the one they had never once bothered to truly notice. The shock on their faces was priceless. The room went completely silent. For a moment, no one knew how to react. Vanessa stood tall, her expression one of quiet confidence. She had spent days in their world, hearing their words, watching their actions, and now it was time for the truth to come crashing down on them. Vanessa's voice broke the silence, low and steady. You've had a front-row seat to the decline of this company, but you never bothered to look beyond your own egos. I've watched you. All of you, dismiss, belittle, and ignore the very people who make this company run. The ones you treat as inferior are the ones who hold it all together, while you sit comfortably, completely blind to the damage you've done. The room shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted around the table, and a few of the managers exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't expected this. Vanessa wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was calm, almost eerily so. But her words cut deep, each sentence slicing through the facade of professionalism they had carefully constructed. She had spent days among them, days that had revealed a culture of entitlement, disrespect, and ignorance. As I cleaned your offices, your hallways, I saw how you treat your support staff. How you mock them behind their backs, treat them like they are invisible, like they are nothing more than servants to your whims, Vanessa continued, her voice steady. I heard you talk about them as though they were beneath you, not even worthy of your attention. You laughed off their concerns, dismissed their complaints, and let the toxic culture grow unchecked. And now, the consequences are showing. A few managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces red with embarrassment. One of them, Richard, the manager Vanessa had witnessed treating staff the worst, stood up abruptly. His voice shook as he tried to defend himself. This is absurd. You can't just come in here. Vanessa held up her hand, silencing him. You're right, she said softly. I can't just come in here. But I did. I saw. And now you will listen. The silence in the room grew heavy. Vanessa's words were hitting harder than any of them could have imagined. She wasn't just criticizing their actions, she was calling out the heart of the problem, the core of the company's culture that had rotted away while they all turned a blind eye. For too long, you've ignored the very foundation of this company, the people, Vanessa said, her eyes sweeping across the room, making sure each person felt the weight of her gaze. The respect, the empathy, the values that built this place, where are they now? You've replaced them with arrogance, entitlement, and a complete disregard for the human beings who make this company run. And it's not just hurting your staff. It's hurting this company, and I won't let that continue. She took a deep breath, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. I've been here, watching. I've seen the cracks, the rot, the damage. It's time for a change. You're either going to fix this culture, or you're going to watch this company crumble from within. The room was dead silent now, no one daring to speak. Richard, the manager who had been most vocal in his defense earlier, seemed to shrink under her gaze. Vanessa's words had shattered the illusion they had all been living under. But the real question remained, would they change, or would they continue to protect their own egos at the cost of everything else? Vanessa turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she paused, her back still to them. I hope you take this seriously, she said, her voice low and full of meaning. Because the next time you see me, you'll know that I'm no longer the cleaner. I'm the CEO, and I will not allow this company to fail on my watch. The camera lingered on her as she stepped out, leaving the stunned management team behind. The silence in the room was deafening, the weight of her words still heavy in the air. Would they heed her warning? Would they be able to turn things around, or was the damage already too deep? The screen faded to black, leaving the question hanging in the air, unanswered. Weeks had passed since Vanessa dropped the mask that concealed her identity. Her once silent presence had become the most powerful voice in the company's halls. Now, those same halls carried a different tone, lighter, more respectful, filled with a quiet energy that hadn't existed before. Something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the people. Managers who used to walk past support staff without a glance now paused to ask about their day. Meetings were no longer one-sided lectures. They had become dialogues, spaces where every employee, from junior interns to maintenance crew, felt heard. The transformation wasn't superficial. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was real, and it had roots. Vanessa walked through the corridors, her stride confident but unassuming. There was no longer a need to command attention. It came naturally now, drawn not from power but from earned respect. She stopped at the break room and smiled as she watched a group of employees, including senior managers, laughing over coffee with the janitorial staff. A scene that would have been unthinkable just a month ago now seemed like the new normal. She had seen it all unravel before, ego, entitlement, blind spots, but now, she was witnessing a rebuilding. One of the most striking changes came from Maria. Maria had once been just another quiet worker, unrecognized, invisible to many. But Vanessa remembered that first day when Maria had extended kindness to a stranger in a cleaner's uniform. That simple act had stood out. And now, Maria stood tall, not just as a supervisor but as a symbol of the change Vanessa had fought for. She led with empathy, understanding that leadership wasn't about control, but care. She encouraged feedback, celebrated small wins, and gently held her team accountable. Vanessa watched her from a distance that morning as Maria directed a small team with calm authority. There was pride in her posture, a quiet confidence in her voice. It was people like Maria who would carry the company forward, long after Vanessa stepped back from the spotlight. Still, it hadn't been an easy road. Not everyone had embraced the change. There had been resistance. Some managers had quietly left, unable, or unwilling, to adjust to the new culture. Others stayed, but only after a difficult reckoning with their own behaviors. Vanessa hadn't demanded perfection, only honesty and growth. The company had invested in proper training, hired mentors, and restructured leadership responsibilities. Even with all that progress, Vanessa knew the job wasn't finished. As she stepped into her office, she glanced at the same reports that had triggered this journey weeks ago. The data had improved: employee satisfaction, customer retention, productivity, all climbing steadily. But that wasn't what made her proud. It was the change in spirit. In connection. In respect. She walked to the window and looked out, her gaze tracing the city skyline. Behind her, the hum of life continued. Phones ringing. Keyboards tapping. Voices exchanging ideas. It all sounded different now. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Maria stood in the doorway with a warm smile. "We're ready for the staff roundtable," she said. Vanessa nodded. "Let's go." The camera followed them down the hall, past glass-walled conference rooms where employees brainstormed freely, past bulletin boards filled with photos of birthdays, team wins, and thank-you notes. The environment was thriving because it was human. They entered a room filled with employees from every department. No assigned seats. No hierarchy. Just one team, eager to contribute. As Vanessa sat down, she glanced around the circle. This right here, was the reward. Not applause or headlines, but unity. And yet, deep in her gut, a flicker of unease remained. Because change, no matter how sincere, was fragile. The camera zoomed in on Vanessa's face as she leaned forward to speak. Her tone was warm but firm. "Let's never forget how quickly we can lose sight of what matters. We've made progress, but staying here will require effort every day. Accountability. Compassion. Awareness." Everyone nodded. Outside, the sun began to set, casting golden light across the conference room floor. Vanessa stood at the large windows once more, watching as day slipped into evening. She smiled to herself, not a smile of victory, but one of quiet vigilance. But just as the camera began to pan out, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. The smile faded, replaced by a focused stillness. She stepped aside and took the call. Vanessa Richardson speaking. A pause. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean there's been a complaint?" The screen faded to black. And so, the journey continues. Because real leadership doesn't end at one act of courage, it begins there. And sometimes, just when you think peace has settled in, a new storm begins to brew. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice about leadership and humility, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Thank you.